a lot of stuff to talk about. So let's start from the very beginning. How did you? How was it growing up?
Well, I grew up in a very nice community, a little town called Miraglia, which is in Contra Costa County. A very wealthy community. My parents bought their first house for $30,000.
Wow.
If you can believe it. And I had a very supportive family, kind of a traditional Italian family. I grew up in the Catholic Church, and that wasn't the favorite part of my childhood, but I was, trained in that faith tradition.
Right.
But it was great. I mean, I couldn't ask for a better place to grow up. That's for sure.
Wow, Moraga.
Yeah.
I can imagine $30,000 now in Moragas.
I know, right? You paid more for your car than
Oh,
I
yeah,
did,
yeah.
or than my parents did for their
Yeah.
house.
Yeah.
Which is crazy to think about, but that was almost 50 years ago.
Right. How was the area back then? Was it still kind of rural, I guess?
Oh, it was extremely rural. I mean, in our backyard, I remember seeing pictures before our fences were put up. There was a cattle roundup that rambled through our backyard.
Wow.
Because it was still cattle lands, and of course it's all homes now, multi-million-dollar homes.
Yeah. Wow. I grew up in the Bay Area too, so it's a great place. I love living in the Bay Area. So
yeah, it was a little sheltered. There wasn't a whole lot outside of the white people that lived there. So there wasn't a lot of exposure beyond the small group of friends that I had going through school together. It wasn't like growing up in a big city, and I think you missed something from that too. But I have no complaints.
So being it was kind of sheltered, I guess how did that affect you when you went to law enforcement?
Well, I think as I look back on it now, there were so many signs as I can look back at my elementary school days and certainly middle school days when I knew I was gay. Looking back at it now, I certainly didn't use that word or have that identity really confidently in my mind at that time, but there was clearly a point in 7th grade when I knew.
Right.
And I also knew at the time, that was 1976, 77, I knew at that time there was no way I could tell anybody because, number one, I was pretty confident I was the only one in the school. There certainly weren't any teachers. There were no gay-straight alliances. There was nothing visible on television that would even suggest to me that that was okay. So I never said a word about that. I didn't even really think much about it. I did everything I could do to avoid going to school dances and everything I could do to avoid having to have a girlfriend because I just had no interest in that. I got involved with a cadet program in Walnut Creek my freshman year of high school, and I was very excited about that because it was law enforcement, but I remember walking in the door of the police department, not really concerned about someone knowing I was gay, but I learned immediately in that first hour that, oh my goodness, if I was out, I would be ostracized immediately. I heard things like, that's so gay, don't be a queer, don't be a fag, all within the first hour. And so I knew that was something I could never disclose.
Is that kind of the way that it was just culturally, I guess, back then?
I think so. I mean, this was 1978. So in 1978, that was the year, it was a big year. It was the year that Harvey Milk got elected to office in San Francisco. It was the year what we now know as the gay flag or the rainbow flag was created and flew for the first time.
Oh, wow.
And it was also the year that Harvey Milk was assassinated by a former cop.
Right. Yeah.
And so there was all kinds of messaging around the unacceptability, sort of the outcast nature of being gay.
So when you went in, so we'll back up a little bit. So what got you started in law enforcement? Did you always want to do something like that?
No, I actually always wanted to be a teacher.
Okay.
I mean, I can remember back from, my early years in grade school, always really aspiring to be a teacher. But my dad was a firefighter. He was a 30-year career firefighter. And he had a friend who was a deputy sheriff, and he said, hey, would you want to go on a ride-along sometime? This is when I was 14. And I thought, sure. And after that ride-along, I thought, oh my God, this is what I want to do. This is so exciting. I mean, I can remember everything we did that day. And I did really, a change of direction that day and said, this is what I want to get into.
Wow. So it just from that moment on, it was
that was it.
We're going to do this.
I'm going to do this. I mean, I was fascinated by the whole police radio thing.
Mm-hmm.
I got a scanner for my birthday or Christmas that year,
Nice.
and had that thing playing all the time. And I really was very interested in that. My dad knew a dispatcher at Walnut Creek where I ended up going, so I got a chance to sit in the dispatch center and watch all of that. And of course, this is before 911 in Contra Costa County. But I was very fascinated by all of that, and I dove headfirst into it.
Yeah. So you started as an explorer with Walnut Creek?
With Walnut Creek.
And then from there, where did you?
Well, I worked, and it was also, I'll say, it was also a great shelter for me, because I was down at the police department every Friday and Saturday night, every weekend, through every junior prom and every senior prom, and I never had to worry about that. And
Right.
My parents could hardly complain, because it wasn't like I was out partying and drinking and doing stuff I wasn't supposed to do. I was at the police department.
Mm-hmm.
So I never got any grief around that, but it provided a place for me to hide, frankly. But I graduated high school, and I should say that I graduated in 1981, and I remember at that time that was the year that the AIDS crisis began to be visible.
Okay.
I remember seeing articles being posted about this disease that was killing gay people. And I was just coming out of high school. But I didn't even think really about that. I was focused on my career, and I got hired as a dispatcher right out of high school and started working full time.
So this crisis happens in the 80s. Was it just not known what was going on, or how did that?
Well, I remember by that point I had already started to kind of explore a little bit about dating life.
So you already knew you're gay,
Oh yeah.
Okay.
No, I had a very good sense about that.
Mm-hmm.
I never used that word to identify myself. In fact, I never even uttered it to myself. But
Why do
I
you think
knew
that
I was
is?
attracted to men.
Yeah.
Because why do I think about it? Why do I think that word didn't work for me now? Because the image for me of what gay was not who I was. The image of what gay was a very flamboyant,
Mm-hmm.
leather-wearing, or super effeminate guys, and I knew that wasn't me.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that I had in common that I saw with that character was an attraction to other men.
Okay.
So I knew that was who I was, but that word didn't work for me, and so it's not a word that I ever used.
Yeah.
But I also, I was out and about and exploring, at least trying to have what could be a little bit of a relationship
Mm-hmm.
in a very private and secret way. Still living at home at the time, there was no way I was gonna risk being exposed. But about that same time is when this quote unquote gay disease started, and that was the language that was used at the time.
I was gonna ask, is that how they kind of put it out there?
Yeah,
Was
it was
this is something that
initially-
just affects gay?
Yeah, it was initially referred to as a gay-related immune deficiency, or GRID.
Wow.
It was called gay cancer. I remember reading articles about that and seeing pictures, horrific pictures of men who had these lesions on them.
Right.
And I thought, oh my God, I've got to be careful. I'll tell you a quick story. I went to a bathhouse right
Okay.
out of high school. And I discovered it. It was down on Ritchie Street in San Francisco. And I thought this was the first time I was going to even walk into a place like that. And I got into the lobby, and I remember there was a red light.
Uh-huh.
So there was kind of a red glow. And I thought, oh my God. And then I started thinking about the risks involved of being in there, and I left. I freaked out and I left. I never went in.
What were those? I'm unfamiliar with the bathhouse. What were they advertised as, I guess, or whatever?
Well, bathhouses actually had a very legitimate purpose back in the early 20th century, early 20th century. When San Francisco was being built, there was common housing for the men who were doing all the building of the city, and there wasn't bathroom facilities in every room.
Right.
So bathhouses were created as a legitimate place for people to go get cleaned up. It's also a place where men began to discover other men that they were attracted to. And so that whole thing sort of evolved from a very sort of practical place for people to use to a place for people to go and have sex. And there was a whole bathhouse culture that emerged, particularly in the 70s in San Francisco, when, you know, decriminalization of homosexuality took place.
Well, it was illegal, right? It was on the books.
It was a felony in every single state until really the 70s.
Wow.
And so there was great risk. If you got caught, you could be put in prison or you could be institutionalized.
Right.
But in the 70s, that changed rapidly, and so there was this sort of sexual freedom that was taking place, which probably exaggerated the AIDS crisis in the 80s.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's interesting that you bring up the bathhouse and dating, because obviously back then there was no apps for dating websites, nothing like that. So how difficult was it for you then, for someone who isn't out, to meet people? Was that something that you just had to do strictly at work, or is it?
Well, I think in the 70s, you know, certainly gay neighborhoods like the Castro were alive. They were thriving because it was a place where people could go and meet, and there was relative safety there because there were large places where people could go. It was a bar scene. I never went there. One, because I wasn't 21 yet, but two, because I was so afraid that someone would see me there, that they might find out. So I avoided all of the places where it was probably easiest to find someone. The very first guy that I ever met and quote unquote dated, I met through a personal ad in a magazine, because that was the option at the time. You know, and he was a sweet guy. I'll never forget him. He was very, very sweet. But, you know, I didn't tell him my real name. I didn't tell him where I lived. I didn't tell him where I worked. I didn't tell him really anything about me. And so it was a very short-lived relationship.
Yeah, it's got to be tough, I would imagine, not being able to tell just basic information to somebody and then kind of hope that they trust you, I guess.
Right.
And trying on them too, so.
I mean, if you really want a relationship, if you want something more than a hookup, then yeah, you have to share who you are and share other parts of your life with that person, and you've got to be honest about it.
Yeah. How do you even? Is there a phone number in the ads or something? Is that how you respond back to them?
I think that's what it was. I don't really remember. There must have been. It must have been a phone number because there was no email at the time.
Yeah.
So it must have been a phone number, and so you call and say, hey.
That's interesting. So back then, you said you started as explorer, and then you became a dispatcher. Is that right?
Yep. So I got hired full time as a dispatcher. I was going to school full time, so I didn't really have a whole lot of time for anything. And I just completely drowned myself in work, and got out and around occasionally around that, but my personal life I kept extremely separate from my work life. All of my social time were with my friends at work, and so I always just made the excuse I was too busy to date.
Right. How was, I think you kind of touched on it already, but how was the environment of law enforcement back then when it came to LGBT? It was
very toxic. It was very toxic. So in Walnut Creek at the time, there were two gay bars. One was an old piano bar. It was called the Pink Gable.
Oh, wow.
But it was always referred to as the Fag Bar. And then there was the Hub, which is now 1220 in Walnut Creek. It was right behind a 7-Eleven. It was in a completely unmarked building with no windows and no sign. So unless you knew it was there, you wouldn't know where to go. But it was regularly the target of comments and remarks.
Right.
Again, the environment was very toxic internally and very toxic externally. The AIDS crisis fueled it a bit because there was such fear around catching this disease. I remember in 1983, a training bulletin coming down that said, we're going to issue you gloves and masks. And anytime you think you may be talking with or encountering a gay person, you should put this on for your protection.
Oh, wow.
So, and the word, because we didn't know how what we now know as HIV, it was transmitted, and so there was this idea that if you were in somebody's presence, you could catch it.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine, you call the police for whatever, and the cop shows up, either knowing or believing you might be gay, in gloves and a mask.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
But the messaging was immoral, unacceptable, and diseased.
That's interesting. And I would assume, were you aware if there were any other LGBT officers at the time when you worked at Walnut Creek? Or at least I'm sure they probably weren't.
Looking back on it now and knowing what I know about sexual orientation as being a spectrum, there were clearly people that were within that spectrum. Now, whether they were entirely 100% gay and hiding,
mm-hmm.
or I don't know. But I definitely know of people who were in that spectrum.
Oh. And so how did that go for you then? Working there and trying to obviously keep your personal life hidden, and then hearing comments, I guess.
Yeah, no, you really have to detach yourself from that, and I did. I just completely detached myself, and I was very protective about the image that I portrayed. And I tried my hardest to remove myself from any chance of being associated or being suspected of being gay. I don't think at that time there were any rumors going around about me. I think I played the straight cop pretty well. When I started working as a reserve officer and being able to go out on the street and spend time on the street and work with other officers, I played that part very well. If we were driving down the street on a Friday night and my partner would say, "Go, check her out, she's really hot," I could respond, "Oh yeah, dang." Now,
and
of course,
like,
I'd be looking at
does
her
she have a
boyfriend.
brother?
Right. No, I'd be looking at her boyfriend going, "Yeah, you're right, really hot." But you had to play that.
Yeah.
You had to play into that.
Right.
In order to survive. And I wanted to work as a police officer in Walnut Creek full time, badly.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that would be something that would have excluded me.
Well,
from that, for sure.
So you were reserved there for how long were you reserved?
About 4 years.
Any interesting stories?
Oh my goodness. Well, there were lots of interesting stories. I will tell you one of them that relates to what we're talking about, and it's an incident that involves the hub, which is about 12:20. So it was about 3 a.m, and I was driving through the parking lot. I was working by myself, and I drove through the parking lot, and I see a pair of legs laying out from the bushes.
Mm.
So I thought, okay,
that's
probably
unusual.
should check that out, right? So, hey, what's going on? What's going on? Obviously somebody who's drunk and passed out, and I roll him over, and it's a guy that I was an altar boy with back in my teens.
Oh, wow.
And I thought to myself, oh my God, I said, well, what are you doing here? That was the first words out of my mouth.
Uh-huh.
And then I thought, well, duh, right? So, he was super drunk, but I picked him up and threw him in the back of my car, and I drove him up to Denny's, threw him in a booth in Denny's, gave the waitress $10 and said, fill him full of coffee.
Yeah.
And then left.
Did you ever see him since then?
I tried to follow up, and I never heard from him.
Wow.
So, maybe he was living a closeted life too. But
and even in the Bay Area, where one would assume it's the most diverse and open to different things, I guess back then it was still...
Not then, and certainly not outside of San Francisco. Outside of that sort of that core gay neighborhood of the Castro, it really wasn't, and certainly not in law enforcement.
Yeah.
So
you went from reserve and then you went full time.
So then I went to Fairfield PD in 1988. I got a supervisor's job there, overseeing communications.
Okay.
And Fairfield was like stepping back in time 20 years.
Why is that?
It was, I think at the time, Fairfield was set to become sort of an up-and-coming booming city.
Mm-hmm.
It was where probably Miraglia in the East Bay was in the 60s. Everybody was moving out there. It was growing quickly because housing was cheap. It was right on the I-80 corridor, so accessible to the Bay Area.
And Fairfield's about 40 minutes or so, would you say, from
Yep.
Oakland or
Well,
San Francisco?
probably from Oakland, by today's standards, a little bit longer than that.
Okay.
But it's out by Travis Air Force Base.
Okay.
And it's right in between the Bay Area and Sacramento.
All right.
So it's it was at the time a booming city, it still is. But walking into that department was like walking back 20 years. The attitudes, the level of education that people had, the attitudes were like the 1970s when I started in Walnut Creek. Now there was a lot more crime there, a lot more violence there, and so there was a lot more going on that sort of distracted from other people.
Mm-hmm.
But it was not a good place for someone who was gay at all. Now keep in mind, to get hired there I had to go through a whole background. So the sergeant that did my background by this point had looked into all of my history at Walnut Creek, all of my history before that.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there was an issue with me being gay, you would have thought he would have picked up on it, and that would have given some consideration to hiring me or not, but they hired me anyway.
So were you out at that time then?
No,
Still weren't.
Was not at
And
all.
nobody in Walnut Creek ever
No one said a word.
knew?
No one ever, I never told anybody there, and no one said a word. If they suspected, but it never came up. And it never was an issue in the background. The reason I tell that story is because that same sergeant years later was the one who made a complaint about my lifestyle to my boss.
What did he say?
So he, at this point, I had been promoted and he had been promoted. And so we were on the command staff together, and he and I had a conflict. And so he went to my boss, who was an assistant chief, and made a complaint about my lifestyle. And I think by that point, maybe some rumors, maybe some rumblings had begun to happen in the department. And so my boss called me in and sat me down and said, I have a complaint from Lieutenant so-and-so about your lifestyle, and I need to talk to you about that. And he had his pen and paper, and this was going to be basically an internal affairs investigation.
Was this a thing back then, that having, I guess, a lifestyle issue or whatever it is? That
I had never heard that. But you have to. I think you have to understand the context here. So, the chief was a great guy. I liked the chief for many things,
mm-hmm.
but he was a conservative Christian. My boss was a diehard conservative Christian, and the culture of the administrative staff was still very conservative, and everybody sort of went to the same church.
Okay.
So there was a strong influence there for sure. But I had a lot of male roommates. I've had roommates my entire life. None of them were gay, and none of them did I have a relationship with. Mm-hmm. But, they're not dumb. If you kind of looked at, okay, you're 35 years old. No, I wasn't 35 at the time. I was, that time, close to 30. So you're 30 years old. You've never brought a girlfriend into the office. You have a lot of male roommates. And I don't like you now because you made me mad. So
Yeah.
I'm going to figure out a way to throw a jab. And so that's what happened. And I remember sitting there in front of that assistant chief as he's getting ready to do this internal affairs investigation going, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. They're going to find out and they're going to fire me. And I was scared to death.
How'd that go? What did you...
And I still to this day do not know where this came from because I had never done anything like this before. But I sat for a second and I leaned forward and I said, you're going down a very dangerous path of questioning here. And if you ever ask me another question like this again, I'm going to sue you and I'm going to take everything you own. I'm going to take your house, I'm going to take your car, and I'm going to take all of your retirement.
Wow.
We're done.
What was his response?
He was dumbfounded. And I got up and I walked out of his office. I walked into the chief's office, which was right across the hall, and I slammed the door. And he looked up from his desk and he said, what's wrong? Mm-hmm. And I told him, rammed down everything that just happened. Mm-hmm. And I was shaking.
So he didn't even know?
Well, I don't know if he knew or not, but he acted like he didn't. Mm-hmm. And I told him what happened. And his first words out of his mouth were, well, Greg, if you are gay, it would be very difficult for you to be an effective leader here.
Wow.
And I just stared at him. And I think he figured out that, I probably shouldn't have said that. And he goes, what do you want me to do? And I just said, you're going to make it stop, because if you don't, I'm going to sue you.
Yeah.
And I left it at that. And I said, I'm leaving, and I will be back when I'm ready.
Oh.
And so I went to our department psychologist, and basically I needed to get some relief. And ever since then, I was treated like a golden child.
At the time, were you aware of any other lawsuits that were going on as a result of
No,
the departments
no,
doing that to people?
I was not. I wasn't connected with that whole culture yet, but I knew that California state law protected employment based on sexual orientation, and I knew that would not be a reason that they could fire me. After thinking about it a little bit, we had obviously had training on that, so I knew what they were doing was wrong. I also knew the realities of the culture, but I shut him down, and he didn't. I never ever heard another word about it again.
Wow.
But that's when the rumors really escalated.
Right. Was that the only time that you faced any kind of
At
harassment?
that department, yes. That's the only time.
Where else did you? There's some cadets out there. We're at the academy, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Now there's yeah.
So you went from Walnut Creek to Fairfield, and then
Yeah. And then so from there, I ended up leaving Fairfield. I went to work at a police academy full time. I had already been teaching part time at a couple of places. By then, I went full time to the Los Medanos Police Academy out in Pittsburgh. I did that for a year.
That's the Bay Area too.
In the Bay Area,
Okay.
right. And then I ended up coming back to where I started my teaching career at Napa Valley College. I came full time in 1999 as a director.
Okay.
It was not out during that process, but of course this is all after all of that.
Right.
My hiring panel had something like 15 people on it. It was a ridiculous
Wow.
number of folks. And I wasn't expecting to get the job, but they hired me. And I'm often asked, because, well, if you were out then, do you think they would have hired me or hired you? And my answer to that is no. Not because the college isn't a totally accepting and wonderful place, because it is, but I just don't think law enforcement, even then in 1999, would have been ready for an out gay academy director.
Wow.
And I think I was probably, when I did finally come out, I think I probably was the first out gay academy director in the state. But of course, now there have been, I know, several, so it's good.
And this whole time, through Walnut Creek and Fairfield and then getting hired with the academy, you weren't out.
No.
Did that, what was the effect on you with that?
Well, I started as the academy director when I was 35 years old. So, the whole leading the double life thing and the whole hookup thing where you don't either exchange names at all or whether you don't use a real name was really getting old. And I was starting to think about, well, what's life going to be like when you're older? There's clearly something missing here for me. And I began to think about a way out. It was really around as I was getting close to 40 years old. That was a big decade.
Now you're dating throughout the time. You just didn't tell anybody. Is that
Right.
how?
Right.
Okay.
And I put dating in quotes because it's not really like I saw anybody more than once or twice.
Oh wow.
You just didn't, because I didn't want to take the risk.
You think is that something that is common? I guess it is.
Yes.
And is it stemmed just because, like you mentioned, living a double life? It's just it's difficult to have relationships that are.
It is, and I think a lot of it goes on. We hear about it once in a while when someone famous gets caught. Who's leading that double life? But it puts you in bad situations. You end up encountering people in places and in situations that aren't safe and that certainly aren't healthy. So it certainly is not a good way to go.
Yeah.
And it's not fulfilling. I mean, there's more to a relationship than just the physical part.
And this is obviously before marriage was legal and all the other stuff. So
things were changing clearly. 1998 was a fairly significant year. That was the year that Matthew Shepard was murdered in Wyoming. It was a few months before the shooting at Columbine High School. So there was a lot of discussion about hate and what are we doing in this country.
Yeah.
And that ended up for me being a pretty pivotal point in life.
You mentioned the Matthew Shepard, and you're involved with the foundation.
Yeah. Well, that story ultimately ended up being the reason or the pathway for me to come out.
Oh, wow.
So in 2000, I watched a documentary that MTV produced. Yes, I watched MTV.
Back when they had music and stuff
back in the day,
there.
back when they actually played music
Okay.
videos. But they produced a documentary called Fight for Your Rights. It was part of a Fight for Your Rights campaign. And the documentary was about the murder of Matthew Shepard. And I remember seeing in chat rooms, because chat rooms had emerged by then,
Mm-hmm.
Conversation about this horrific hate crime, but I never really paid much attention to it because I didn't really consciously connect with the community. So I watched the documentary and I was devastated by it. And I thought, oh my God. And I ended up writing an email to what is now the Matthew Shepard Foundation, but it was addressed to Matt's mom saying, my God, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how this impacted you, and we're trying to do a lot at our police academy around hate crime training and, blah, blah, blah. The short story of this is that I ended up getting connected with Judy Shepard, and I met her that following June. She was involved with a documentary, and I got a chance to meet her at a training session. So I was able to bring Judy Shepard to the college for a community presentation in August of that year. Mm-hmm. Still not being out, but she had just begun to speak publicly, and so there was a lot of interest, and we packed our gymnasium that day.
Wow.
I mean, it was really very moving. But that got me involved in wanting to do some speaking and some advocacy for this new organization that she had started. Mm-hmm. And so we became friends that weekend. So I did some speaking programs with her and went and heard her, and one of the things that she always said was, the way that we're going to change minds and hearts is for people to come out and to share their stories. Mm-hmm. And that started to resonate with me, almost to the point where I thought, oh my God, she knows. She's talking to me. And I really got thinking, if we're going to really try to create some change, then I need to be an example. Plus, I was looking for that way out. So that's what led to it. Now, how and when it actually happened was completely, I think, something that I still can't explain how and why that happened. Do you want to know about that?
Yes, please.
So in 2004, a variety of circumstances happened at the academy, and I was going to do double duty as a recruit training officer for a class in order to save some money so that we could use the money for something else. Something I agreed to. I was excited about it. I was supposed to be the recruit training officer for a class that started in April, and in the very last minute, I had to take the class that started in January. I say that only because I always think things happen for a reason, mm-hmm. and there's a reason that January was going to be the class. So here I am doing this very unusual thing, doing double duty and going back and being an RTO. About 2 months into the class, one of the students in there, I started to think might be gay. He was very interested in the Matthew Shepard story, unusually so, and I thought, I wonder. And he didn't represent himself. He wasn't the stereotypical kind of gay person that I didn't see myself as back when I was 14 years old. Mm-hmm. So I remember he showed up one time to a study session with spiked blonde hair and a puka shell necklace and a silver studded belt. And I thought, oh my God, he is.
Is that the uniform for?
It was a study session, so everybody was there in civilian clothes.
I mean, is that the uniform for gay? I guess.
Yeah. It was
okay.
kind of a stereotypical thing, and I thought, I know he is, but of course I didn't know for sure. So we were having a conversation about hate crimes and growing up, and I think he was throwing some hints my way, and I said, I think we probably have a whole lot in common. And I don't remember if he suggested it or I suggested it, but we were going to get together and talk about it. Mm-hmm. And I agreed to have dinner, which looking, knowing then, I mean, I knew then, and certainly I know now, that is a very risky thing to
Sure.
do with a student.
Yeah.
Extremely risky. On top of the fact that I'm going to maybe share something with him that I've never shared with anybody before. But there was something inside that said, this is the person, this is the time, this is the place. You've been asking for this for several years. It's go time. So I took the risk.
So you went to dinner.
We met for dinner at Applebee's in Vallejo,
Oh,
of all places.
fancy.
Yeah, fancy. I splurged, right? And we sat down. I remember driving there. My heart was pounding. I was sweating. I remember sitting there just as absolutely nervous for just a whole variety of reasons, not the least of which is I'm really jeopardizing my whole career with this. And I said, so what's your story? And he came out almost right away. And then he said, what's yours? And I said, well, I'm in the same boat. I'm gay. And that was the first person I had ever told.
How did you feel after that?
What first happened was I said, and I'm gay, and you're the first person I've ever told. And that was the part that threw him. He was actually expecting me to come out to him. In fact, I learned later he had a bet with his roommates that that's what was going to happen over this dinner. But he had no idea that he was going to be the first person I'd ever told. And so we just talked and talked and talked until it probably was too late, in the evening. And I wanted to keep talking. And he says, I'll help you. I'll help you. And, anytime you want to talk about it. So, I left feeling, it's hard to describe the relief, the excitement, oh my God, this is a life-changing kind of an experience. But also very worried about, okay, we've got a job to do here. You've got to get through the academy, and we need to maintain some distance. And that was difficult. It was difficult because I really wanted to talk with him more, and we did have some great conversations, but there had to be that distance until he graduated. And it was not good. It was not good.
Yeah.
There were people in the class that knew about him. There were people in the class that saw us talk a lot. There were people in the class that began to make some assumptions about what was going on. It was very difficult.
Wow.
We never were romantically involved at all. But there's that assumption, that there must be something going on there.
Yeah.
But it was crazy. I didn't tell anybody else until about 2 months later, and I told two very close friends. And then I ended up telling my sister because I knew that if I told her, she would tell everybody else in our family, and which she did, and it was all great. I had all very positive receptions. There were some people on the staff here who had begun to hear rumors, and they were very concerned, and but it all worked out fine. I was more nervous about it than they were. And then I had to tell my dad.
How'd that go?
And so my dad, again, was a 30-year career firefighter, diehard Catholic, and I was very concerned and uncertain about how he was going to react. And no one else in my family could tell me how he was going to react. So I decided to write him a letter. And I wrote out a letter, and I did it in kind of bullet points, trying to address everything that I think he would try to think about. All the blame he would try to take, all the reasoning, all of that stuff. And I overnighted it to him. Literally did overnight mail.
Wow.
And then I sat there by the phone, waiting. So he called, and he goes, I got your letter, and I said, okay. And he goes, I just wish that you were here so I could hug you and tell you I love you. And I thought, that is the $64,000 answer.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, I'll be right down. So I drove down to his house. He was living in Danville at the time. And then we had this great conversation.
That's amazing.
So,
and it doesn't always go that way, though.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And I look back on it now, and I think, oh, why didn't I do this years before? And I feel so fortunate to have amazing family and amazing friends. No one ever said anything to my face that was either hurtful or negative. Every one of my friends has been entirely supportive. Now, do I think that people haven't been talking behind my back or haven't said terrible things behind my back? I'd be foolish to think that. But no one ever said a negative word to my face.
That's great. And then, in your time here at the Academy, they're accepting and they're great with
Yep.
it, and
Well, I think it took a while. I've known my whole life, but when you tell someone who doesn't know, it takes a little bit of time sometimes for them to understand. And I had a lot of stories to undo with people because there was this narrative about who I was and what my life was all about that was, 41 years old. So I had to go back and correct a lot of those things. There was a lot of, how come you didn't tell me? How come you didn't feel like you could trust me? I thought I was a good friend.
Yeah.
You are a good friend. I do trust you. I didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of that fixing to do. But once that was all done, then I think people got a true sense of who I was, and I could be totally open with them, and it's always been a lot better.
Okay. And is that kind of what led you to, because you've written 2 books?
Yep. So I met Tony, who's now my husband, that same year. It actually went very, very quickly, but we met that same year. And as we got to know each other, he says, you should write a book. And I had done a tremendous amount of reading when I came out, and there really were no books about gay cops out there. The ones that were out there were very old, and they chronicled tragedy, And I had begun to meet other cops who were gay and who were out and doing very, very good work. And so I thought, I'm going to write a book about my experience and about the possibilities, because once you come out, everything changes. And yes, there may be some bumps along the road, but life is just so much more fulfilling and complete when you don't have to hide. And you also disempower people. When you hold a secret, other people have power over you. And when you remove that, they have no power. So I really wanted to try to promote that. And I had a chance to write about that, and that's been great.
And the book's called?
Coming Out From Behind the Badge. And then the second book is American Heroes Coming Out From Behind the Badge.
Okay.
And then there's a second edition of Coming Out From Behind the Badge that actually is a whole new book, but I liked the title and I didn't want to come up with a third title, so I just made it a second edition.
And this is a series of interviews that you've done with different folks?
It's the current book. Current version is got some text-like chapters in it, some history, some explanation about sexual orientation, how to create an inclusive workplace. It's kind of prescriptive in that way. But the bulk of the book are stories from officers around the country about coming out and what they did to be successful. So they are all stories of success and overcoming obstacles along the way.
Interesting.
So hopefully the officer who's sitting there going, like I was, how do I find a way out? You could pick this book up and read it and go, oh, this is how I can do it.
Yeah, there's probably somebody out there that thinks they're the only
Right.
gay or lesbian or
I have heard
trans
that.
cop.
I have heard that over and over and over again from people that think, oh, I thought I was the only one. And there are hundreds.
Do you think there's a level of unacceptance, I guess, in that
I
culture, and
think
why is it?
I think law enforcement is still predominantly straight white male. I think it's predominantly hyper-conservative, and it's always been about 20 years behind the rest of society in accepting any kind of change. Women did not begin to work patrol jobs until the late 70s because they weren't accepted or viewed in that way. Well, the feminist movement was in the 60s, folks. Racial minorities did not even begin to really have any kind of presence in the rank and file until the 70s. We're just behind, and we're behind in this area too.
So, that being said, has there been a lot more training then, I guess, with law enforcement nowadays?
One of the questions people asked, more recently about, well, what happened to your career? How did your career go after you came out? And I would say that it really exploded in a positive way. I think in the academy, it's important to present role models to new recruits. So just like we try to present women and different racial representation. We also need to have out LGBT folks teaching. And so I've decided that that's one of the roles that I can fulfill as a teacher. So I share with students right from the very beginning who I am. What I have found is that in every single academy class there is at least one gay, lesbian, or bisexual student who probably was just like me, thinking there's no way I can ever be out. And you say, well, how do you know that? Because I have had students come out to me and say, oh my God, I never would have thought I would have met a gay cop, let alone admit, tell, come out during the academy.
Yeah.
And it's happened more than once.
Wow.
So, you know, it's important. And it gives us the ability to do training. You know, we do training with our academy recruits on cultural diversity, and one of the things we do is we take them to the Castro for a field trip.
Wow, that's interesting.
To do a whole exploration of the community, and also to examine law enforcement's relationship with that community. Now, if you would have told me back in 1978 when I started at Walnut Creek that I would be doing walking tours with academy recruits down Castro Street, I would have laughed at you.
So what do you do at this walking tour? So you go throughout the area, and then is there something else?
Yeah, so we do a walking tour of the neighborhood. We go to the LGBT museum. We really are focused on law enforcement's history with the LGBT community.
Sure.
And then for the last 2 hours, we have a panel discussion with a group of LGBT law enforcement officers.
Wow.
We meet in the basement of a Catholic church, of all places. But they welcome us, and we sit in a giant circle, and the officers share their stories, and the students get a chance to ask questions in a very non-threatening environment. They have this great exchange. And so it's an amazing, I think, very real experience that they leave with. And the officers represent all different races, all different nationalities. We have male and female, and even a trans officer that participates. And it's awesome. It's the best way to teach.
It's interesting. I mean, I would imagine it's probably, for some, maybe their first exposure to something different.
It is. We've had people come out as a result of that experience. We've had people that have reconnected with relatives who are lesbian and gay, who they've been ostracized from based on that experience.
Is Napa the only academy that, well, I mean...
San Francisco does something similar. We're the only one that I know of that does that particular immersion. We're not just focused on gay stuff at the academy. We also do an immersion at a mosque.
Oh, wow.
And we examine Islam as a religion because it's such a mysterious and challenging area in culture. And then the students do cultural research projects on other nationalities that they come back and present on. So it's part of a comprehensive effort, but we're here and we have the ability to do it and the expertise to do it, so why not?
Yeah, it's not just learning how to handcuff somebody or pull somebody over like I would imagine academy is, but
that's right.
Learning about the community.
Yep.
That's really interesting. So you have that training here, and you're working on some training for law enforcement within the whole state.
So there is no training requirement for law enforcement on sexual orientation and gender identity. It is mentioned at a very low level in some of the state workbooks that are available. And so I helped draft a bill for Assembly Member Evan Lowe that will require in-service training for law enforcement on sexual orientation and gender identity minorities, and will also require those topics to be incorporated into basic training programs so that future law enforcement officers throughout the state, not just in Napa, receive that basic level of training. So we got to go and meet with the Assembly's Public Safety Committee yesterday, and I testified, and the committee voted to move the bill forward, and now it goes to appropriations.
Wow. And that was in Sacramento. Do you see it passing, or is there opposition to this bill?
The opposition has come from Cal Sheriff's Association, who cite financial implications of the bill. That's a typical position that they've taken against training bills. They always cite that it costs too much. My response to that is, it's costing you too much not to do it.
Why is
there
what
are
do you mean?
millions of dollars every year that are paid out of taxpayer money to settle unlawful discrimination and harassment cases involving gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity. So training is the most effective way, I think, to create change in the culture. Hate crimes are on the rise against LGBT people in California. And now with marriage equality, incidents of domestic violence are a real concern, as they are in opposite-sex relationships for law enforcement. So dispatchers and officers need to be skilled, and we have an obligation, I think, to provide them with the knowledge to be effective. And most importantly for me, it's about dealing with the cultural issues in law enforcement that stood in my way and that continue to stand in the way of others. It is unacceptable to think that we would treat people that we work with in this profession the way that we do because they're gay or lesbian or transgender.
Mm-hmm. So the bill would go over training cops or law enforcement how to deal with not only the community LGBT, but also the officers as well, right. Or deputies or whoever.
Right.
Okay. Do you think, I mean, you mentioned there's opposition because of funding. Do you think there's going to be any other pushback just because of?
I think that'll be the excuse that people use. They don't want to do it. They don't want to deal with it. They don't think that they have any gay employees. I think that will be part of the opposition. Whether or not that'll be vocalized, I don't know. But I think it'll just, the excuse will be that there's not enough money to pay for it. However, the reality of it is we have a course certified by the California Post that already exists. It's already been developed. It's ready to present today that meets the needs of the bill. There's an online training program that my little nonprofit operates that's available for free, that a dispatcher and officer can do from their laptop and their workplace on duty and complete the training for free. So I don't buy the argument that it's going to be too expensive.
Yeah, and like you mentioned earlier, that just the kind of, I guess just law enforcement in general is, or at least back then wasn't friendly to LGBT.
Right. And the difference today is that we have out gay and lesbian police chiefs. They exist, and there are out gay and lesbian officers and transgender officers all over that exist, and they're doing very well. There's also a lot of very closeted officers who are still afraid to come out because of how they think they're going to be treated. And there are still incidents of officers who, when they do come out, are mistreated unlawfully. And so we have to fix that problem.
What would you say to people that would look at this new training and say, well, I'm aware that there's a LGBT community out there, but I don't want to be indoctrinated with whatever kind of information you have. Like, I don't want to.
I would say that you cannot control who calls 911 and whose house you're going to show up to. And wouldn't you rather be skilled with the knowledge to be able to at least provide basic service to those people who call you for help than be left in the dark?
Right.
There's a lot of stereotypes out there about LGBT people, many like I had when I couldn't myself identify with the word gay, that are just not true. And so this training will help alleviate that and hopefully make it a more comfortable situation for officers, because whether you like gay people or not, you're going to get called for service, and they deserve the same service you're going to provide to a straight person.
So you're not trying to change anyone's opinion or mind or anything like that with the training?
Absolutely not. You know, one of the first things we tell our students when we start the whole cultural diversity block, when we're talking about all of these different things, religion, disabilities, culture, we're not here to change your beliefs. We're not here to tell you that your morals are wrong or that your religion is wrong. What we're here to do is give you the skills and knowledge to serve people equally, because that's what the 14th Amendment requires. So you can believe whatever you want to believe as long as you're treating people fairly and equitably and hopefully comfortably. That's what we're concerned about.
Yeah. And that was yesterday, the 17th, so we're looking at maybe, you said May or something?
Ideally, the bill will get all the way through by summer, and we anticipate the governor will sign it in September, or by September.
Okay. That's amazing. I mean,
it's very quick.
To go from not being out at all to authoring bills for law enforcement statewide, and it's
Yeah, it was a little surreal yesterday telling my coming out story in front of a bunch of TV cameras, in front of an assembly committee. You know, when I think back to 1978, yeah, it's a whole different world.
Well, I couldn't imagine going up there and talking about anything to. So you do, well, I mean, you've done a lot, but you also teach at the college too.
Right. We have an LGBT Studies program at our college that I was able to create, and it's a joy to be able to do that. It's an educational program for the community, but it also is a place where students can discover themselves and not have to wait maybe 20 years to be able to have a coming out opportunity or to understand who they are. And so it's a fun program to be able to do.
And same thing, you take those students to
We do
the
the same,
Castro.
Right.
And
A little different. They don't have a panel, but we do a scavenger hunt, which allows them to explore the neighborhood a little bit. Maybe if they are gay and they were like me and afraid to go, this is their excuse to be able to go. But again, it's to learn about the history and to see the culture for itself.
And you mentioned you're married.
Yep.
How is that? Is he a
It's great.
law enforcement
So
too?
Tony's a school teacher, teaches fifth
Oh,
grade
okay.
in Santa Rosa. So we share the commonality of teaching.
Mhm.
He came out when he was 25, and so he was very comfortable and confident, you know, and I was still brand new.
Mhm.
In fact, that was one of the things he was worried about when we first met was, you know, I don't want to have to deal with a newbie. But I had it's not that I had never dated before, it's just that I had never dated authentically and 100%
Mhm.
with who I am, and so it's
How-
been great.
Well, a lot of stuff. Done
Yeah.
a lot of stuff. And how's the academy going now? Is it going
It's great.
pretty well?
Yep, it's going very, very well. So this afternoon we're going to go in and meet a brand new class, and so you'll get to see a little bit about that. But that's always fun on that first day to do introductions and watch the looks on people's faces.
And you mentioned that there's usually at least one person that's either gay, bisexual, or lesbian.
Usually I find out much later, sometimes not until after graduation, but it's very rare when there's not.
So what would you say to somebody who's watching who is either gay or lesbian or trans or what advice would you give them that's in law enforcement or getting into or already in law enforcement, I guess?
Live your authentic self. If you're getting into this profession, the worst thing that you can do is lie. There are protections in place for sexual orientation and gender identity in most states, many states. But there are no protections for liars. So you can legitimately be fired as a cop if you're caught lying. It would be difficult to fire you if you're gay in today's world. So don't lie. I think that's the riskiest thing for closeted officers.
It's just lying. I guess lying about their lifestyle could lead into something else.
Yes. Plus, you're doing yourself a disservice. You deserve to live a happy life all the way around, both personally and professionally. And you can do that.
Yeah, that's. Do you think that? I mean, you mentioned kind of the way culture was with law enforcement and LGBT, and now we have a younger generation, I guess, that are going to be cops, and I guess they're more exposed to it already. So, does it seem like is training going to help, or does that eventually
Yes.
have to be
No,
just younger people coming in, I guess? And
both. I think that training is going to help change the existing culture, at least start a conversation about it. It won't be something we just ignore, but there will be conversation which will lead to change. And then this new group of people coming into the profession, they've grown up with gay-straight alliances, with gay friends and relatives. The whole gay rights movement, civil rights movement is very visible for them. And so they're much more easygoing, much more understanding. And there will be more LGBT applicants who are out already applying for law enforcement jobs. So I think the training will escalate this pace at which change is going to take place, because it's, again, 20 years behind.
Yeah.
We should have gotten past this a long time ago.
So you do a radio show too?
Yep.
And how's?
I have an LGBT news radio show. We do a news magazine style show, and so that's really fun. I've been able to meet some pretty amazing people.
You're a busy guy.
So yeah, that's kind of busy. It's kind of
It
busy.
makes me feel like I don't do anything. So.
Well, I think it's good. I feel good about doing it. I'm passionate about it. Maybe I'm making up for lost time, but I feel like I have a real connection with this community and I have something to contribute to it. So I'm running with it.
What's next?
I don't know. I don't know. I think if this bill gets passed, I'm going to be very busy being able to help get that training off the ground.
Yeah.
So that's probably the next big piece. It's going to be doing training and trying to see where this all goes.
Oh, sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah, I'm very excited
a lot
about
in
it.
store.
And if the bill fails, we'll still push the training out. We'll just try to take it a step at a time, one person at a time, one agency at a time. Because I do think that law enforcement as a profession is just on the verge of wanting to do this and wanting to learn.
Yeah.
You just need to nudge them forward a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we'll be staying in touch and
Stay tuned.
getting some updates, and we'll see how that whole thing goes.
Good.
So we'll catch up again soon, and we'll see how the bill goes and everything with the academy. So
Sounds good.
all right. Thanks.
All right, thanks.
See ya.